It's Joan Young here from the Behaviour Change Collaborative. I'm absolutely delighted to be able to be here today to share with you a topic that I'm really passionate about, which is the role of motivational research in creating effective behaviour change communications. So we all know that influencing behaviour change through communications is really hard. But the good news is that it is possible. And there's never been a time in our world when we need to be communicating more effectively than right now with all of the issues that we're facing. So if we truly understand the people that we seek to influence, we can create communications that make a difference. But of course, it's not that simple. What I want to share with you today is based on my last 30 years of attempting to do research that really helps communicators to understand the people that they're aiming to communicate with so that we can develop communications that really work. Of course, it's not simple because we know that people are really complex. There's the easy to get to left side of the brain responses that people will tell us about, the things that are logical, practical, the things that are easy for people to talk about as reasons for their behaviour. And then, of course, there's the whole right side of the brain, which is really where the emotions sit. And it's often what's really driving behaviour, but it's much, much harder for people to express. And often with developmental research, the research we're all doing before we develop our communications, there's so little time. And of course, what we're advocating for in this presentation is that we do take that time to really understand the people we're communicating with so that we can develop effective communications. It's really easy to fall into the trap of doing what we've always done. The traditional interview questions. So I ask a question, you give me an answer. And the problem with that is that it's not getting below the surface. We all know that the things that people are happy to talk about really don't explain the depths of what's actually going on inside their heads and inside their worlds, where, you know, the subconscious mind actually explains about 90% of what's happening. And increasingly, as I think some of the previous speakers have said, we're needing to move online with the way that we do research. And particularly this year, of course, with the challenges that we've all faced, more and more face-to-face research and qualitative research is now being done online. And this can be particularly challenging because, as we all know, 93% of communication is non-verbal. Traditional online focus groups that were text-based really ran the risk of missing over 90% of what people were trying to communicate. Of course, with video-based online focus groups, we have a better chance of getting and hearing the voice, the vocal clarity and the verbal expressiveness, but it's still extremely difficult to really see the feelings that people wear on their faces. With their posture, their eye contact, touches and gestures, extremely difficult to understand online. And of course, what happens when we do skim the surface in terms of our research is that we tend to get the obvious kinds of answers. If we ask people what's going to encourage them to be healthy, to quit smoking or stop drinking, then they talk about the negative consequences of not doing that, the fear that they have of ending up needing open heart surgery or having brain damage, for example, in the health space. And in the road safety space, it's all about the negative consequences of being in an accident, killing other people, or fines or penalties, for example. When we do move into the emotional space with many examples of advertising, it tends to be about eliciting fear or anxiety or shame or blame. So we end up calling our people that we're trying to communicate with sad losers, bloody idiots or mindless drunks, and really telling them that no one thinks big of them. So how can we do a better job in terms of really understanding our audience and then using that research to guide effective behaviour change communications? Well, many years ago, I happened to be at an overseas conference and I had the thrill and pleasure of hearing Sharon Sutton actually present her work. And what I love about this model is it really ties in the kind of research that we need, which we're just coining for this presentation, motivational research, with how to develop a strategy that is going to lead to action. So this model shows us that if we do our consumer research to really understand the consumer reality, not just what's easy for them to tell us, but their values, their beliefs, their desires, their needs, and their behaviour. We can do that, then we can develop as part of an overall program, the kind of message strategy that is going to lead to the development of campaign and material that will create action. And what I love about the message strategy is that it's got 6 core questions. The first one here is, who are we actually targeting? So being really clear about who the communication is aiming at. And when we say who, we're not just talking about demographic groups. We're not just talking about behavioural groups. We're talking about what's actually inside their head and their hearts that's guiding their hands and the context in which their behaviours occurring. So it's really understanding those people and what it is that motivates them. We also need to be really clear on what we want them to do, the action. It's very easy to talk about what we don't want, and it can be a lot harder to find an alternative behaviour that people can do, that we can use in our communications to change behaviour. And then, of course, the what's in it for me, the reward. Why should they do it? What's the benefit that they're going to get? Is absolutely critical. Followed by, what's the critical evidence that the promise will be delivered? So how are we going to support that message? How are we going to prove that they will get the benefit if they do the action? When is the best time to communicate with the target audience, when they're going to be most open to the message that we want to send, and what is the best way to engage them with the message at a time when they're going to be open to it? And lastly, another one that often gets forgotten is that all behaviours are associated with images. And it's really important that we understand the way that we need to position the behaviour so that it's relevant, desirable, and appropriate for the people that we are aiming to communicate with. So I thought I'd share that theory. It is an oldie, but it's a goodie. And I think it can really guide us in terms of using research to help to develop really effective communications. Why motivational research? What I'm passionate about is going beyond just asking people for their opinions and their thoughts and their reactions, to actually dig deeper, to understand the emotional, social, and contextual drivers of their behaviour so that we can feed into that message strategy, because it's really informed by the consumer's reality. We know that humans have basic needs, and of course there's physical needs. What we're talking about here is emotional needs, feelings of safety, belonging, freedom, power, control, and status. Communications are effective when they motivate consumers at this basic needs level. We need to understand consumer reality. The challenge we have as researchers and as communicators is that we are not necessarily conscious of our needs and our motivations. And we may do things with little conscious thought, but we like to think of ourselves as logical, rational, and sensible. We often give rational, not real explanations when we're asked about our behaviour. We may not share what's going on under the surface because it may sound illogical, irrational, or impulsive, or we may not even be aware of it. So we need to understand people's rational... Yes.
Sorry. You've got a couple of questions from Matt in the chat.
Great. Let's hear from Matt. Fantastic. So I'm just going to have a look at the chat. Sorry, I am unable to do the two things at the same time. Okay, I can't see the questions from Matt. Could you share them with me, please, Jeremy?
If you switch to the stage chat, because right now you're in the backstage chat. There's
Okay.
the stage chat.
Okay.
It's along the right side at the top.
Okay. Sorry, guys. The right side at the top. No, can't see it. Sorry. You're going to have to read it to me, Jeremy.
So Matt Fenwick asks, when you talk about image, do you mean visual image or grounding metaphors / appeals to the imagination?
I'm talking about not just visual image, although that can be a large part of it. I'm actually talking about how people perceive the behaviour in their mind. So do they see it as something that people like them can do and will benefit from? Or do they see it as something for people that they would aspire to be like, such as, actors or actresses or famous people? Or do they see it as something that only people not like themselves would do, perhaps people with more money or more education? Getting that positioning right for the behaviour and presenting it in a way that is attractive and appealing to the audience is what I'm talking about. I hope that answers your question. Are there any other questions, Jeremy?
Matt also had another question. When clients ask for superficial research on opinions, etc., how do you convince them to go deeper?
I think what we need to do is give them examples of the risks of superficial questioning and rational responses. And the risks are that if we always do what we've always done, we're always going to get what we always have, when what we actually need right now is a breakthrough. We need to be developing communications that are effective, that really change behaviour. And if you have a look at some of the published case studies about what they are, you will see that they're tapping into, oftentimes, emotions that consumers have and drivers that are really important to people that those people are unlikely to have expressed. That's what I want to be showing you today, if possible. And I'm sure as a researcher, you would have, if not yourself, then within your agency, examples of really fantastically effective work and work that hasn't been as effective, which I know can be difficult to talk about, but I think it's a matter of really believing in what we're talking about here and having proof and evidence of it. Are there any other questions?
That's all.
All right, lovely. So, in summary, what we're saying is that it's important to understand people's rational drivers, of course, and things like accessibility, having the skills and education and opportunity to do the behaviour that we're talking about are all critical and very practical and rational. But it's also vital to understand the emotional needs so that we can develop communications that will influence people, because it actually offers them a benefit that meets their needs, that is actually motivational. We all know that when we ask people, as researchers, how come we didn't win a project if we weren't successful, our clients will often say price. And yet we all know that there are many more drivers of that decision probably than price, and that it's uncomfortable sometimes for people that are making decisions and having to communicate with potential suppliers to actually tell them the truth about what they didn't like or what the problems were. So what we're talking about is really needing to be able to do research in a way that the participants are comfortable and able to really express what's actually driving them, and that's to be talking about their motivations. So I really love this quote from Bill Shannon of the Shannon Group. And what he's talking about here is if we really understand people, then we can inspire change. So he's saying you can legislate for change, you can throw money at it, you can smother your audience with information, but if you want people to change willingly and for good, you must inspire them. Inspired change happens when a behavioural insight is combined with a powerful emotional connection. Inspired change can benefit an individual, a business, or a society as a whole. It's change for the better. So I'd love to hear your reaction to that. But to me, it really captured what we're talking about when we're talking about the motivational research, which is the topic for today. There's also a theoretical basis for what I'm talking about, which I'm sure we're all familiar with, the COM-B behaviour change model. What it tells us is that if people have the capability, the skills, the education, the knowledge and the confidence to be able to do something to change their behaviour, and they have the opportunity to do it, then the missing ingredient is oftentimes motivation, being able to tap into the benefits that will inspire them to act. So the primary task for communications research is often to identify the motivations that will drive behaviour change. So I want to look at some examples. Now, unfortunately, we've discovered quite recently that you may be able to see these ads that I want to share with you, but you probably won't be able to hear them. So I'm actually going to do the voiceover of the ads, and I really apologise for that. But hopefully it gives you a good sense of what is coming through in the advertisement. We're going to look at the ad, and then I really want to hear back from you the extent to which you can see that they demonstrate the kind of best practice and models that we've been talking about. Now, these ads are a selection of campaigns that I've worked on over the last 30 years. And so I do know what's behind them and how they were developed. But at the same time, I'm really interested to see if it shines through. If you can look at some advertising and point to how it actually demonstrates the features of the models that we've been looking at. So this is the interactive bit. So get ready to put some comments in the chat room. So here's the first ad. Now, this is a real oldie, but a goodie. And I will attempt to talk it through. I was unemployed on and off for years. I probably didn't realise it at the time, but looking back at it now, being on the dole was no fun. Unemployment was my career. I'll tell you, you've got to make something go click in your head. You've got to make a decision yourself. You've got to really want to do it. If you really want a job, there's one out there. Maybe not today, maybe not tomorrow, but there's one. And if you want it, you'll find it. So these were the areas that we have been looking at in our motivational research, understanding consumer reality, their values, beliefs, desires, needs and behaviour, so that we can develop a message strategy with a purpose, a target, a promise, the support, and with the openings and image that are really going to motivate the audience. So I'd love to know your thoughts about that ad that we've just had a look at. And I'll share with you some of the insights from the research that was conducted quite a while ago. So Jeremy, is anyone in the chat room?
No questions or comments have been said so far.
Okay, well, I'll just tell you what I was going to say, which is that this was quite groundbreaking work originally when this was done. The reason is that instead of blaming and shaming unemployed people for being lazy or not wanting to work, what the New Zealand Employment Service did was actually use real-life job seekers who had been successful in gaining employment to tell their stories and to really send that message of hope to those long-term job seekers who were really struggling to maintain their motivation to job search. So they used real-life people who talked about their fears and desires so that they could send a message of hope to the audience. So I think it's quite a good example of showing consumer reality and sending a message that actually appeals to the audience rather than prevailing views of society about that audience at the time. Jeremy, let me know if anyone's chatting.
Megan Dunn says it addresses belief.
Absolutely. It addresses self-belief, as in trying to encourage people that are really almost given up. And that was actually the segment that the research identified. And then that was the segment that the client felt would be the hardest to reach, and send them that message that actually, if they just keep trying, eventually they will get a job.
Tamara says, taps into hope and desires.
Correct, absolutely.
Amy says, uses social/peer element in affecting behavior change in a hopeful way.
Absolutely, that's right. It's a positive message. It doesn't dress anything up. It's realistic. It's actually showing consumer reality, and is sending them a message to give them that motivation. Now, on its own, it's not going to be as effective as if there's a service that person can tap into that gives them the skills and capability as well as the opportunity to get that work. So it's part of an overall program that's designed to help people to get jobs. But if we don't tap into that motivation, if we use the blame them, shame them, stick approach, the chances of them actually being motivated to continue on and on and on when they're not getting feedback from employers that they do get an interview with, and they don't know and they've almost given up, without that motivation, it's extremely difficult for people in that situation. So I'm going to move on to the next ad. This is one in Australia that we're probably all familiar with. But I'll have a go at doing the voiceover too. Not drinking tonight. Not drinking tonight. What? Not drinking tonight. Crikey, she's not drinking? Oh, right. Pardon, who? Not drinking. Becky's not drinking tonight. Really, mate? Becky is not drinking tonight. Becky is not drinking tonight. Becky's not drinking. She's not drinking tonight. The UN position is clear. Becky's choice. Copy that, Houston. Becky is not drinking tonight. Staying in tonight, Beck. Yeah, they'll get over it. Return to your homes. Becky's not drinking tonight. So this one, a different sort of approach, and it's really based on very good ethnographic research with young women to find out about the reality of their drinking behaviour and what they need to hear to help them to be able to reduce their risky alcohol consumption. Jeremy, are there anybody asking any questions or noting anything in the chat room?
Matt says, downplays the idea that a decision not to drink will have drastic consequences in social isolation.
That's great, yeah. So what the young women, they knew about the bad consequences of drinking, their experiences with violence, being sick, being embarrassed, and making fools of themselves in their own mind, and spending a lot of money and being out of control, not remembering what's happened. Those kind of experiences were very obvious to them. They didn't need them to be played back through communications. They were also really not concerned about health consequences for their excessive drinking. What mattered to them was they needed social support to be able to, almost permission, to be able to not succumb to the peer pressure of, drinking every night and drinking to excess. So this ad was about giving young women that permission to control or be in control of their drinking behaviour. So if we look at the message strategy, the purpose here is to encourage young women to drink less and drink in a less risky way. The target's obviously young women, and we show that in the communications. The promise is that it's okay, they'll be accepted if they don't go out with their friends or have another drink, because there's different components to the campaign. The support is that we can see through the ad evidence that everything's really okay. The world is not going to stop if we say we're not going out. How it was communicated through multiple channels that really target that particular group. And the image is a together, in control young woman who is strong and has the ability to, potentially disappoint her friends. So are there any comments on the chat room before we look at the next one?
Yes. Megan says addresses peer pressure. Tamara says uses humor to support counter-cultural decisions, equivalent of hyperbole.
Absolutely. That's exactly right. And see how easy it would be without the consumer research to just go out there with the same kinds of communications that we looked at earlier on about being a bloody idiot or being a dumb drunk or that kind of message. What we're trying to do here is actually empower the people whose behaviour we're attempting to influence through positive messages and role modelling of the behaviour that we're looking for, and showing that the fear they have that they will be ostracised or not accepted by their friends is actually not the case, and using humour to do that in a really great way. So let's have a look at another one, and this is another way of communicating road safety messages. Hello. Every school kidly knows that a caterpillar turns itself into a butterfly. Lovely, isn't it? In a similar but less than lovely way, your mates can turn into something too. All they have to do is get behind the wheel of a motor car, and sometimes they turn into a total or a massive or even a complete and utter. It's called metamorphosis. But there's an easy way to stop your mate from morphing into something rather unpleasant. Observe the following reenactment. Okay, so I've got some questions for you with that one. Who are we targeting? And what do we want them to do? Perhaps I'll answer myself. If anyone does chat in, then let me know, Jeremy. But what we're talking about here is quite a common strategy these days. I think in those days it was fairly groundbreaking, which is around actually looking at, in a situation, who is the person that could actually create a positive outcome out of a bad potential situation. If we're trying to communicate to get people to stop drink driving, at the moment when the driver is drinking, it may be really difficult to get them to stop drinking or to change their behaviour. But if there are mates around them, then we can communicate to the third party, the mate, in a way, again, that gives them permission to intervene in order to save or support their friend. This tactic's been used quite a lot now in things like street violence, for example. The Championship Move campaign from Victoria is another great example where we're actually trying to get the bystander or the friend to intervene because they're sober. They can actually be receptive to those messages and do something to save their friend. So I hope that, yeah.
Tamara says designated drivers. Megan says targeting mates of drinkers. And Romani says young men, we want them to hold each other accountable.
Good. Okay, well that's great. And this is about trying to save lives, and oftentimes there's only one person that can do something in that moment. In this case, it's actually the friends. And this gives them a bit of backup and support to do things which they may be concerned will have a negative impact on their friendships. So if we're asking a young man, to actually intervene and stop his friend from drinking or being violent, for example, when the friend might expect the friend to go along with that and actually get violent too or drink as well, then we have to make sure that we're sending a message that that's okay to do that. In fact, that's a great thing to do. It's what a real mate does. And also in this particular campaign, there was a lot of point of sale material, like you saw the anchor sign, and there were, the little things they have on pub counters, coasters with things that you could hold up showing a chicken or a doorknob or an anchor, so that friends had a cue in the environment where the drinking was happening to be able to, have the strength to actually do something to help their friends. Any other comments about that one?
That's all.
All right, let's have a look at another one. And this one is in the area of domestic and family violence, so just a little warning for people that might not want to watch. Oh, someone should say something about what's going on next door. Someone should do something for the family's sake and the kids. Someone should do something, because that could end up saving her life. That someone is you. Because if you think someone's going to get seriously hurt because of family violence, you're now required by law to tell the police. Or when it's safe, get a person you trust to contact them for you. Family violence is always wrong. Report it. Be someone. So once again, it's a strategy of, if we're looking at domestic and family violence, in that moment where the woman is going to be killed potentially, there's only two people that can do something about it, and that is the perpetrator changing their behaviour, or the witness actually doing something to intervene. So in this case, the purpose was to stop deaths. The target in this particular campaign or ad was actually the bystanders. And in this particular situation, there had been many cases of violence occurring publicly where nobody had acted or attempted to help the victim. The promise is that if we do call the police, we will feel a sense of having done the right thing. So you could see there in the actual visuals, not a wildly smiling or beaming person who's thrilled with what they've done, but someone who is getting social acknowledgement from the people around them that they've actually done the right thing. That's really to counter the big barrier to getting involved in domestic and family violence, which is that you're sticking your nose in someone else's business and you should stay out of it. So in this case, we're actually saying people around you will know that you've done the right thing and support you in doing what you're doing. The support was actually showing the different scenarios, different settings and different contexts in which we might overhear violent behaviour, but then, of course, modelling the behaviour we want, which is call the police, do something. Again, this message was communicated very widely in the particular location where the campaign was undertaken. And the image, we put a lot of effort into thinking through what sort of person would do the right thing, and how can we build a bridge between people who've witnessed domestic and family violence and haven't done anything, and the people who do something. How can we build a bridge emotionally to show that doing the right thing is achievable, and it is actually going to give that person a reward of knowing that they've done the right thing. Hope that makes sense. Are there any comments in the chat room on this one?
Amy says, trying to overcome bystander effect and get people to act.
Correct, absolutely. Because of the logic that we went through at the beginning, which was to say, if we really want to save lives tomorrow, next week, then we need to do something in the moment, because there are too many women being killed on a regular basis. So we can't wait years and years to change people's attitudes, which may or may not lead to different behaviour. We actually have to do something right now. And what we want to do right now is actually give the people that can see it happening something they can do that they can feel good about doing. And also there's a perpetrator commercial, which I will share with you later as we go through. Oh, it's right here. So here we go. A warning again. When I grow up, I want to be just like Dad. I'll be the best in the football team. I'll meet someone special. And I'll soon show her who's boss. You make me sick. My wife and kids will be scared of what might happen when I get home. 5 minutes to shut up and let me sit down. My kids are going to grow up just like me. Family violence. Stop. Think about what you've got to lose. And do what it takes to cool off. Or talk things over. Stop the hurting, start the healing. So I'd be really interested in your feedback on that one. What it's attempting to do while we're waiting for any comments or feedback is really identify with the perpetrator in this case. So the research that was involved here involved face-to-face interviews with violent men, including people in prison, but also people on the streets, some that were no longer violent, some that are still violent. And what it looked at is, what are their values and beliefs, and what do they want, and what do they need in order to, instead of continuing their violent behaviour, actually doing something different. So this research identified that the things that they could do instead of lashing out could be to walk away, take a deep breath, call for help. So those are the behaviours that are demonstrated in the ad. Once again, it's modelling the behaviour that we want. It's targeting men who actually want to change and showing them what they can do instead. And actually, I'm sorry, I think I finished before I showed you the end, which had the promise in it. And the promise is that there may be hope for their relationship with their partner or with their children. And that was the fundamental driver for violent men in terms of changing their behaviour. Some of them had given up on their relationship with their partner, and so it was all about trying to have some kind of relationship with their children. Others still had hope that they could, build a relationship of trust with their partner. And so the ad actually attempted to show that whilst it might not be happy families riding off into the sunset together, that if he isn't violent and he does get help, that there's a possible way that the relationship can continue. The openings, once again, there was bus stop advertising, outdoor advertising, TV, multimedia, social media. The image there is to try to show a man who has the courage to actually change his behaviour and that he can achieve a positive outcome. Now, there were alternative strategies to this, and I know there are many different approaches in this space. And we have to be so careful that we don't, those unintended consequences someone was speaking about earlier, the more that we demonstrate to the man things they will lose if they continue their violence, the more that the advertising can potentially then stop women from reporting violence because of all the things he's going to lose. So this was the next best strategy in terms of messaging to violent men. Are there any comments, Jeremy?
Yes, Tamara says, the shock factor of a child delivering their message is highly effective.
Yes, and that is a strategy that has been used in a variety of different campaigns. The only caution I'd give to that is there are people that are very motivated by, not wanting their children to experience harm. And yet, if we are a violent person who is being violent in front of the children or to the children, that is not necessarily going to be a motivating factor. So it's more shocking, I think, for people that don't see that kind of behaviour all the time than people that do. What we've got to do is appeal to the self-interest of the person that we're trying to influence, because ultimately that's very likely to be the biggest motivator. Now, I know that's controversial and very happy to discuss that. Or if anyone wants to talk about that further, please get in touch with me. All right, so we'll keep going. So how do we do motivational research? So in the time we've got left, I'm really keen to just share some research approaches and ideas with you, and hopefully they'll be useful and valuable for you. So some things we want to talk about here is the value of observation. So ethnography is the trendy thing at the moment, which is great because the kinds of ads that I've just showed you could not have been developed if the research had not been in situ. So we're talking about actually being in the situation that the people are in when they're making decisions about what to do, whether to apply for that job, whether to be violent. I've got examples of research where that you get one set of information if you talk to someone in your own facilities about, for example, how to reduce recidivism, what could be done to help them stop going back to prison, versus if you're actually in the prison talking to people about their experiences and why different programs and interventions can't work because of the culture and the pressure that's on inmates and prison officers in that environment. So, it's just shedding, really giving so much more by being in situ and observing the behaviour. Another one is vaccinations. So if you talk to parents about their vaccination experiences, you get one set of information. If you accompany those parents when they're visiting the doctor or the health centre, you get quite a different perspective. So I can't advocate enough for ethnography and observation, or at least in situ research. The other thing I want to say is depth interviews would always recommend those for behaviour change research. And I know, again, that's controversial. We'll talk a little bit more about that. The online survey results is just saying that wherever possible, we want to quantify. We want to have a baseline of behaviour prior to our intervention, and we want to be able to track and see that the behaviour is actually changing. We also may want to track, levels of awareness and attitudes and see and knowledge and see how those things change over the course of our communications. But in terms of inputting into the message strategy, it really is all about the qualitative research. Qualitative research that doesn't just skim the surface, it doesn't just ask people questions using open-ended techniques. It actually gets below the surface and really gets into those hearts and those minds and the context that people are in. So why in-depth interviews and why ideally face-to-face? The reason is we need time to understand people's context and their values and beliefs and their motivations. We need time with each individual to really understand those 6 lines of inquiry that are so critical to this consumer-based communication that we're talking about. So just imagine in a focus group, let's say it's 2 hours, and you've got 8 people, that's 15 minutes with each person, and that is not enough to understand what they do, why they do it, what would motivate them to change, and how to actually communicate with them in a way that's going to change their behaviour. The other thing about depth interviews is no risk of bias from other group participants. So remember, we're talking about emotions, and we're talking about sharing sometimes embarrassing or negative or even things we're not conscious of. It's difficult to do that in a group situation without feeling potentially that we're going to be judged and also being biased by other people. There's a greater opportunity to probe into responses, so we can actually probe into the feelings. So people might give us an answer, but it's not actually about feelings, but we can then immediately probe and say, so how do we feel about that? What feelings would that give us? Or what sort of words describe that? What sort of words describe how we feel? So we can get below the surface and the superficial response in an in-depth interview that's so hard to do in a focus group when there's 8 people and we're desperately trying to get through all the questions, let alone get into each question. There's a high level of comfort discussing emotions and non-logical motivations in a one-on-one setting, more flexibility to be able to follow the participant lead. So we have a discussion guide. We can actually go with the participant and go in the order that they want to talk about things in and probe into the things that they're giving us to a much greater extent than we can in a focus group. And of course, more time to use projective and enabling techniques that we're going to talk about a bit further on. We have the ability to identify different motivational segments. I think earlier speakers have talked about how important it is not to assume everybody's the same and they're all motivated in the same way. And of course, greater opportunity to observe and follow up the non-verbal communication, which is 93% of the way that we communicate. So we want to get below the surface, and one of the best ways to get into those values, beliefs, desires, needs and behaviours is to use projective techniques. There are a whole variety of different projective techniques. I'm just going to share with you some training that I did with the Market Research Society in Canberra a few years ago now, where we wanted to really try and explain projective techniques and how they work to government communicators. So what we're talking about here is projection being a defence mechanism, an attitude or desire that one finds disturbing in oneself is transferred or put onto someone else. That tendency to combine objects or events with characteristics or meanings that are derived from our subconscious. So projective techniques consist of a situational stimulus that encourages a person to project part of him or herself to an idea system onto an external object. For qualitative research, they're generally light-hearted, so we often frame them in terms of let's play a game or let's use our imagination, or we're going to do something really different now. They're safe exercises that enable people to express feelings and reveal insight. So there's 5 different types, and we're going to go through each one of those quite briefly. The association ones, we can use things like word associations, and we can ask people what words go with that, what words describe that. We can do thought bubble completions, so what could this person be thinking or saying or feeling, or what would the actual behaviour be saying. We can use personification. So let's imagine that a service or a message or a behaviour was a person. Let's describe that person. What are their personality traits and characteristics? What do they do with their day? What do they really like? What don't they like? And if we met them, how would the conversation go? So in this way, we are asking people to separate themselves from how they see the issue or the service or the communications, and to have a conversation with it like it's a person. So here's an example of thought bubble, and apologise for these very dated examples. Imagine this person's seen this ad. What might he or she be thinking or feeling? We can also use picture association. This is a favourite, so we can cut pictures out of magazines, for example, or find pictures on the internet and ask people which pictures actually fit with which situation. And then we ask people, it doesn't matter what pictures they choose, but we ask them to describe the pictures, how they feel about the pictures, the sort of person that those pictures would appeal to. And that really helps to get below the surface. The batteries are good as well. So let's imagine that Centrelink has... Yes.
5 more minutes.
Okay, thank you, Jeremy. Let's imagine that Centrelink, for example, has died. What would we say about Centrelink? What would be on their tombstone? And in this way, we can get to how people really feel about the brand or the organisation, rather than necessarily what would be easy for them to say if we just asked them. Completion, we can use sentence completion. So this research will be successful if, and ask the client, for example, to complete the sentence. Positioning and perceptual mapping is a fantastic tool. So we might have different words and we get people to group them in for whatever reason they want, in any way that they want, and then explain why they've grouped them that way. This can be quite helpful if we're looking at communications media, the best way for people to communicate, for example. And here's an example of the little thought bubbles. I might take ecstasy because I've got no intention of taking ecstasy because. Construction, so we can use projective questioning. So let's imagine someone who is taking ecstasy. What are the reasons they do it? Let's imagine someone who's stopped taking ecstasy. What are the reasons that they aren't doing it anymore? And we can also talk about would other people like us in our situation do, say, or feel if situations were happening? A guided fantasy is always lots of fun, where we're getting people to imagine the ideal advertisement or the ideal situation, the ideal service, the ideal program. Expressive techniques, it's wonderful to get people drawing. Drawing just helps people to anchor with their emotions, and then they can describe what they've drawn. Can really help people who struggle verbally. It's really great with kids, but it's great with seniors as well. Psychodrama, heaps of fun if there's time. We'll actually get people to pretend that they are someone who does a behaviour or doesn't do a behaviour, and they're talking to someone who's the opposite and explaining how they feel and why they do it. And choice ordering is really, really good. Let's make a line of different could be messages, for example. Which one is most appealing, least appealing? How come these ones are here? That's a great technique that we can use. People are often motivated differently and can be segmented according to those needs, and communications can be developed targeting people that are motivated by different benefits. So this is the New Zealand Employment Service segmentation that was done many, many years ago now. And as a result, we've had a look at the types of advertising that was created, but here's another one.
They don't have audio, Jane.
Oh, I'm so sorry. I'll just start that again. I was just assuming you could hear what I could hear. I'll start again. I recommend for anyone to go out there and work. For sole parents especially, because I know how hard it is on the benefit by itself. I can go along and get a part-time job and it doesn't affect my benefit all that much. My boy says to me, "Oh, are you just going to stay at home all day, Mum?" I says, "No, I'm going to go out at work." That's the best thing about it. They say they love to see me get up and be so rosy in the morning and go for my job. It makes me feel too much. So sorry about that. So, the reason I wanted to show that one is because for the New Zealand Employment Service, there were 6 segments identified, and they actually went about developing communications targeting each segment with the kind of promise, the kind of image that would encourage each of those different motivational groups to be job active, be actually searching for work. Now, I have got more case studies that I would love to show to you, lots of different models and segmentations and ads and research, but I haven't got time. So I would just like to give you the opportunity to make any comments or questions that you'd like to ask in these final few moments. I just wanted to summarise this model because I think if this is all that you take away from the presentation today, I think it's valuable, which is when we're wanting to develop communications, we really need to understand consumer reality. We need to understand people's values, beliefs, desires, needs, and behaviour, both rational and emotional. And then when we're developing a strategy, it's really important that we're clear on the purpose, why we're actually doing the communication, who we're targeting, what's the benefit or motivation that we want to promise people, and how we're going to use the creative to support and provide evidence that they will actually get the benefit that we're promising them. Of course, thinking through when are they going to be most open to the message? What is the moment, the window of opportunity that we have, and how are we best to communicate the message? And then never forgetting that the way that we show or depict the audience in our communications sets the tone for whether this ad is going to really connect and engage with our audience, or whether it's going to connect or engage with a different community and not be effective amongst the audience that we're intending it to reach. Okay, thanks very much, everyone. Have a great conference. I hope you're enjoying it as much as I am.